Bliss and Grit is an entirely listener-supported show. Supporting us is also designed to support you through keeping the episodes rolling, but also through rewards for your donation, like a Getting Started guide, a private forum, and downloadable meditations. To become a supporting member, you can visit patreon.com/Bliss and Grit. Hello, beautifuls. You're listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Brooke Thomas, and I'll be joined soon by my dear friend and co-host, Vanessa Scotto. On the show, we're having conversations about the awakening spiritual path, and what does that even mean? What is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything, the beauty and the crazy, the joys and the messes, the bliss and the grit that is a human life? Today, we are talking about the rules that we may have made for our lives at some point, which gave us a frame of reference for how to navigate life in a sane and mature way, and those moments in life when we are asked to figure out if those rules are to be followed to the letter, or if a more subtle discernment is called for. How do our rules initially help us to be reborn? And how can they keep us in needlessly small lives sometimes? Most importantly, how do we figure out the difference and learn how to trust ourselves when life is requiring that we make decisions that go against any of the rules that we made for ourselves? If you're enjoying the show, there are a few ways you can help support us. You can leave us a review, and that helps more people find the show. Also, we just love hearing from you all. You can also head over to blissandgrit.com to subscribe. We send out a Friday digest of resources that we're loving. Or you can become a supporting member on Patreon. We've chosen not to have advertisers on the show, so becoming a patron is the way to help us keep the episodes coming. And if you've been benefiting from the show, we would super appreciate you going over to Patreon and making a donation. It is patreon.com/Bliss and Grit. We also both see clients privately. That's the main way that we make our living, so feel free to go to the website for more information on that. Last thing, before we head into the conversation, we do curse, and this episode was a particularly sweary one. So if you need headphones to listen, you should go grab them. Okay, here we go. Hello, Vanessa.
Hello, Brooke.
I would like to talk about rules that we make for ourselves and when life forces our hand in needing to off-road from those rules a little bit.
Forces our hand.
Forces our hand. And it's like time to really test out whether or not those rules are true. So this is coming from personal experience. So I guess I just want to say to start that that all of us, let's say, there's a high probability that all of us have done something in our lives where we felt like, wow, I really fucked up. You know, it could be something like, wow, I really flunking out of algebra in high school, and it really landed in us as like, I really fucked up. I'm going to swear a lot in this episode. We weren't kidding when we said wear headphones. Apparently. Or it could be, some of the more challenging patterns. So I'm a sober person. People who are in recovery, that one can be in there really strongly. And somebody who's maybe dealt with mental illness, there can be, and like, wow, even though we know that these things are, from a rational perspective, not our fault, right? It can be interpreted by the separate self as like, wow, I really screwed up my life. And so one of the adaptive things that we do is we make spoken or unspoken rules, or we participate in communities that have rules, which are intended to help us have like an external guidance system frame. And these things can be incredibly helpful. So as usual, none of these conversations are to like throw one thing out and say the good thing is over here. So in my case, some of my rules have come from pretty strongly like the Al-Anon community and adult children of alcoholics. I found it very, very helpful to learn that work and to learn about what codependency is and how it plays in people who would call themselves a member of these teams. And a lot of it, not surprisingly, is about emotional sobriety. Like, how do we not become addicted to excitement? How do we not run away from whatever's going on and off to the thing that's going to magically save us? What are the rules of being a sober, and by sober I mean, technically of substances, but also emotionally sober adult in the world? How do we adult? What are the rules of adulting? And those have been tremendously helpful for me. And then those of us here, people who have these kinds of conversations about being on the unfolding path, whatever you want to call it, there is a place, and there are several places in our lives where we're actually, life being our spiritual teacher, life brings us circumstances that requires that we have to go, do the rules apply? The rules that I've used to keep myself safe, to make sure that I make safe, sane, nourishing choices, do they really apply? As you might expect, I'm up against one of those places now. And those places usually require that there's a decision or there's some action, which is what makes it scary, because it brings up that narrative of, I don't know what to do, and I really hope I don't fuck it up. So what are the rules so I can be safe, not make a mistake? And some of us have that really deep inside of ourselves if we've recovered from trauma, abuse, mental illness, addiction. This is a strong one. It's a strong narrative and helpful. The only trouble is that it also keeps I can't trust myself. There's something fundamentally off or wrong about me that I can't trust. And so I had better be careful narratives. It keeps all of those narratives at play. And so actually our lives don't change. We sort of give ourselves these small, safe lives. And there's a stage for that when we're really tender on newborn legs and emerging back into life. But if it becomes what we do 100% of the time for the rest of our time here, life just gets very tiny, and it can recreate a lot of the walking on eggshells patterns that we had to do externally maybe. We just keep careful. What are the rules? So for me right now, it's this wonderful tapestry of things, all of which are super positive and enjoyable, but they're all woven together in this way of like, a lot is all the stuff that I hold most dear is relying on this. Will I be able to earn a living? Am I being a good parent? Am I doing what's best for my kid? Am I doing the smart thing for me? All of that gets woven in. Where is home? Where do I live? And it's because of this school community, which I mentioned before. I won't bother going into all of the details, but the ways that for me it's woven all together, it's like, okay, it's a perfect match, but it's not the norm. It's like outside the box. It's a homeschool cooperative. So it's not like picking a public school or picking a private school. It's off-roading. And it requires a long commute. It means I would be co-working on site, which means I have to trust my digital work more than my in-person Rolfing work, which means everything's woven into it. Now, my rules say, don't go off-roading, because magical thinking has gotten you into quite the mess more than twice. And it says, if it's complicated, which in this case I'm thinking about the commute, that's a hallmark that you're fucking up. It should be simple, it should be available, and it should be right up close. Now, in my experience, that's true. When something really arrives that is straightforward and let's say in alignment and feels like flow, that is a hallmark of something I can trust. But this time life was like, let's get down to the real subtle layers here with all of the ways that not choosing that, what it means for what the other choice is just putting me into this delightful little corner where it's like, you're going to have to really look at all your rules and look at what's really true here internally for me. And here's the scary part, actually choose from that place. There's no not choosing. For example, my son's school ends after this year. He's going somewhere different next year. He can't just keep going where he's going. My work life is shifting and changing. I could put my head in the sand and just do what I've done for the last 20 years, but it's actually carrying me along on its momentum. So anyway, I know I'm not alone here. I know that a lot of the people who listen to this show have recovered from something, even if it was feeling like you made a poor choice at some point. And what do we do when we have to choose outside of the very comfortable frame of our rules for operating in safety in our lives?
I love this. Actually, as you were speaking, so many examples came into my head of moments where I was in the same position that were even more, one of them very simple and straightforward, and then one of them not so much so. But what occurred to me is that this isn't just in cases of trauma and mental illness and sobriety and things like that, that this is probably a fairly run-of-the-mill condition because the ego protective mechanism is one that wants to stay safe. And in that journey, innocently, keeps trying to predict safety. And how else could we predict safety but creating rules? And like we spoke about in the basic trust episode, if there was a rupture of trust in the synchronicity and flow of life, trust that you're a soul who's here on an awakening journey and everything is here for your evolution, trust in yourself, if there was that kind of rupture, which is basically the case for most of us, and essentially us, why we're living from our ego personality so much, then you're going to try to come up with predictive mechanisms and then tools to support that, or in this case, rules. So it's almost like a conversation we've had before on management versus transformation, though, is at some point we have to take action, right? It's not enough to sit in our rooms and meditate. And in fact, almost like what you described, Brooke, if we were to hold as true that we're here to evolve as souls, life won't let us get away with that anyway.
Right. Life doesn't want us to be the placid one sitting on a lotus leaf. That's not the goal.
Who never makes a decision and never challenges their concepts and never pushes up against with friction their ego personality, right? So that doesn't even work. And you get into a circumstance like you described where it's almost like, I have to make a hard choice, right? I can't not make a choice. My son is graduating from school. There is a choice to be made. The only question is, which way will I choose? So at a certain point, we have to unfreeze and take action. And yet we can have all of these rules. So I'm going to share two examples, one really quick. This one's going to be so silly sounding, but I was a notorious overeater in my life. I'm not saying I'm recovered. I still probably lean in that direction, but it was quite outside of my control at an earlier point in life. So I used to have to make rules for myself. Like if I had sugar one day because it didn't agree with me, I could not have it the next day because I would spiral into a cycle. If I couldn't eat pasta, I couldn't even eat starches for a little while because if I had one bowl of pasta, I had to have 2 bowls of pasta. So I would just create rules to protect myself, right? Because the consequences of me eating sugar every day were quite uncomfortable in my life. They created a bit of dysfunction. And the consequences of me eating 2 bowls of pasta when I was like absolutely stuffed was something I didn't want to live with. So in the beginning stage, I just created all these rules. And then, of course, what happens over time is we start to gain more resilience. we start to gain more fluidity. And then there are no rules. There is just what's true in this present moment. In an area like eating, for me, because it wasn't really such a big deal, that happened quite fluidly. For other people in eating, it may be a much more difficult process. But here was the kicker example for me in my life. And I've told this story before, but it might have been a long time ago. So let me refresh your memories. When I got divorced from my ex-husband, in our divorce conversations, if any of you have ever been divorced, you know you have the opportunity to have many uncomfortable conversations. And in our divorce conversations, he made an allusion to not really ever having wanted to get married, and that it was my desire to get married that had prompted it. And the insinuation that I got out of it was I had pushed him into marriage and it didn't go well. Okay. I go on to have another relationship, and in that next relationship, I want to get married. He doesn't. Yet. Which is the worst case scenario, right? Like, not just I don't want to get married.
He's not just like, no.
Yeah, just not yet. And so I get to decide.
Hang on a sec.
How long should I sit around and wait for this? I chose to break up with him. And I had this very clear vision of I didn't want to drag someone down the aisle. Okay. So along comes my beloved, my current husband, Mario. And we meet, we start dating. Mario was also divorced much more recently than I was. I had had years between my divorce when we started dating. And lo and behold, after going through an uncomfortable divorce himself, he's like, I don't think I want to get married. And I'm like, oh no. Because at the time, the rule in my head created by my ego protective mechanism to stay safe was, I don't want to be with anyone who doesn't want to get married, period. And that will save me from that whole uncomfortable mess. I will just avoid all circumstances that look, feel, and smell like this. So we hit a crossroads where in our conversations where I don't know why marriage means so much to me. P.S., by the way, in case any of you are wondering that, but it does. And he was less inclined. And we were having conversations. And ultimately, he was like, if I was going to marry anyone, it would be you. I want to marry you. And I'm like, oh, what am I going to do here? Because my rule was, don't get involved with someone who's not equally or more on that page than you. But in reality, if I was in contact with the very moment and the relationship I was in, it was the best, most loving relationship of my life. And in reality, Mario is very different than any other man I've been with, as each person is different from themselves. But that tenor of holding someone responsible doesn't exist in him. And so as I kept slowing down and being with this, I was at that crossroads you're talking about, Brooke, where I was like, well, either I'm going to hold on to my rules, and then I'm guaranteed to be safe, at least from him doing this to me, or I'm going to trust what my gut is saying based on what I can observe in the present, and I'm going to proceed in relationship with him. And that was a really scary choice, because what if I was wrong? What if I misread him, I misread us, and one day, 5 years down the line or so, he was like, you made me marry you, and I didn't want to be married, or he just wasn't enjoying being in a partnership like that. What if? And then it's like, almost like, because you're breaking your own rule, not only do you have the pain that comes with whatever that loss or disappointment is, but you have the pain that comes with thinking you're a fool.
Yeah.
Like, you should have
There's
seen
this
it.
humiliation, shame on top of it.
Yes, the humiliation. You should have seen it and you didn't. And so I went for it. And that was a big breaking of a rule. I certainly don't regret it. If it falls apart and he blames me for, well, I'll tell you all and we'll see how it goes.
We'll do a whole episode on it. It'll be great.
But, it was just that same moment where I realized, and I realized this when working with clients, people will have rules. Maybe they got their heart broken once because they called someone too much. So then they come up with a rule, I'm never going to call anyone again, or I'm never going to call more than once a week. And it's like, yeah, but for the right person, you can't call too much. Yeah. Or they think, I moved too fast last time. So this time I'm going to go slow.
I'm going to date him for 5 years before I decide. Yeah. Before we move in together.
Sometimes relationships are just magic and they move really fast. So how do we break out of that dogmatic structure of the ego personality that in innocence is like, I just want to stay safe. Here's the rules on how to be more in a present, alive relationship with life.
Yeah. I always love when we're about, 20 minutes into a conversation and I realize, we're having a conversation about classical spiritual themes here. So we're talking about a leap of faith. We're talking about pretty radical self-love and self-forgiveness because we have to be able to forgive the one who fucked up in the first place. And the radical self-love is like, what if you're just living the life that you're supposed to live, as opposed to I screwed it up, I should have, I shouldn't have. But yes, at some point we're up against this leap of faith where we have to go against our rules. And the only reason why we would do that is because there's something else nudging us internally. There's something from the deeper being, from our soul, that's like, it's like tapping on us. You don't have to pay attention to me here. I'm going to put you right in a circumstance where you have to act or make some decision, and it's going to break a rule. And I'm not talking about that kind of reckless, like I said I wouldn't go out partying for 3 days ever again, but I'm doing it. Like we're talking about that moment when life goes along its path and there's the fork in the road, right? And we have to decide which route are we going to take? Something that really isn't about a temporary moment of pleasure, which would be the addictive impulse, but something that's about like, what's in my best interest for my life? If I'm a good shepherd to this one and I'm here for me and I want this one to have a good experience of life, like I used to have a compass called Don't Break Your Rules. Here they are. Now I have to get acquainted with this more intimate compass called life or our soul that's trying to participate in bringing us to a new place. So it's probably worth talking about because we've all been up against these leaps of faith. And I would say we all have a certain amount of shame about how we should have done something differently in our lives or should be able to currently do something differently in our lives. How do we trust to make a choice that goes against the rules for our life?
Well, the first part is it's difficult because patterns do exist.
Right.
And if a pattern isn't seen, isn't loved, isn't released, then it will keep replicating in your life and it will co-opt the way that you interpret data. It'll co-opt your entire perception, right? So that's part of what I think makes it difficult. But at the same time, if we never take action, if we never experiment, this is what my intuition felt like. This is where my heart's telling me to go. I'm going to take this step and then I'm going to see. I'm going to see, was it a pattern? Was it my soul? Like I'm going to see and I'm going to learn and I'm going to adapt all of those things. And I'm going to trust in my resilience. If you don't do that, you're just a victim of your own conditioning, right? Then you're just stuck in freeze mode, which has so many consequences to it. So I think, it's a little different. It's a little difficult. And one of the things I'd like to add to the conversation is external orientation versus internal orientation. And so yesterday I went to a workshop with a teacher named Dr. Sue Morter. We'll put her on the website in the show notes. And I'm probably going to butcher her concept a little bit, but I want to read a quote, because what I think is interesting is the mind is always looking externally. It's looking at cues and its environment to make its choices and to determine who it is. In that case, you could imagine that we're looking at our circumstances. Does this circumstance look safe or unsafe? Does it look desirable or undesirable? But our focus, our energy is outward. Now, that's not a position we can get intuition from.
Right.
Right? Because the mind is what's doing that. It's looking outward. And if you imagine yourself really pondering a situation or a circumstance and a choice, you could imagine how easy it is, almost like you're putting your energy on that. So like it's leaving your body and like going to it. You can see how externally you're orienting, which is just what the mind does. It's what the ego safety mechanism does, is it scans the environment for clues on if everything's going well. But that's not a way to get intuition. That's the mind leading the choices. And since the mind is often the aspect of us that is the most conditioned and the most wired to safety, especially the primal brain, we need to be accessing the creative aspects of our being, the higher brain, the intuition and the gut wisdom that we possess. So then that requires us learning how to have an internal orientation, to be aware of the sensations in our body, to be aware of the energy in our body, to be aware of where our constrictions are and where our releases are. And I think as we do that, we get more sense of our wholeness, we get more sense of our resilience, but we also then can begin to trust and play with what's coming through, I think in a way that's more viable than if we're constantly just looking at the factors and all of the external circumstances. And my friend Jane said, but Dick said, and then Sue said, if we're in that mode, I'm not sure we should trust its intuition and not just the same pattern if it looks the same.
That's so funny, because one of the phrases that keeps running through my head right now is I'm not making any decisions by committee. It just keeps coming to me because I'm also, as you know, Vanessa, house hunting some. And so there's just all these decisions, office hunting again, just all this shit came up again with like all this timing.
Something
to be like,
about your life where you always have to make it all at once.
I know. I think it's a personality thing of like being a little wired for intensity. But that there's this, oh shoot, I totally lost my train of thought because I was thinking, oh yeah, I'm not making these decisions by committee. Has been such a relieving thought. And what you're pointing out is like a part of the relief is I trust me. This is me. This is my life. This is all on me. And there's no input, no matter how much I might love literally everyone on the committee who I would bring on the committee. It doesn't matter. Like I have one dear friend who, asked if she could come house hunting with me this week when I go. And I was like, no, I don't want anyone else there. I just want it to be me. I want to know it's coming from me. And so sometimes we need to kind of quiet the external noise, whether it's the committee is one of the external noise, and just be like, I trust me. So I need it to be a little quieter out here. I don't need everyone to be giving me their advice about what choice to make or what they think this looks like or what patterns they might be seeing.
I mean, we have enough neurological noise.
I know. We don't need everyone else's opinion because they're just pulling it through their filters too, right? You know, like everyone's just putting it through their lens of seeing. Yeah. And then the other one is to acknowledge that the projecting out, the external orientation, it can only be what the separate self does, which is past projected onto the future. We've said it a million times, but it's worth always reiterating that it only has what life used to look like, what happened in the past. And it's safe if you just go, that's the template. Got it. Take the template, cut and paste, copy it, project it over there on the future. And now you're safe, but you're actually just pulling the past forward all the time when you do that. So the place that the present tense exists, the place where a new thing can arrive, a new decision, a new orientation towards something, really can be with our internal sense of knowing. And I'm not saying that this stuff is easier or that we're going to do this episode and be like, here's the process, right? Because what we're talking about is what you and I do one-on-one coaching sessions with people for. It's what we talk about in every episode here. It's basically...
And it's why we meditate and
it's why we are on the path. It's a journey to awaken to ourselves as inherently trustworthy and safe and knowing and in relationship with life. It's not like here's the 5 steps, but just having that frame as context, right? Like that's the journey I'm on. And so there will come times where life presents me with an opportunity, just a little pop quiz, to say like, am I using the external orientation response? Whether it's pulling in other people's opinions or taking the past, projecting it on the future, or is there a way that I can use all this stuff that I'm doing when I'm spiritualing, meditating, doing embodiment practices, doing inquiry practices? Can we start to really trust that those are sturdier legs that we can stand on when we're being given an opportunity to make a decision from a new point of view and bring those things in?
Ultimately, that's resilience, right? Mm-hmm. And that is something that, from a psychological point of view, even from a basic trust point of view, it's like knowing the well runs deep. Whatever happens, however this turns out, I will be able to rise to the occasion. And there's an invitation in this for me, which is a big deal. And what you were just saying about the external orientation and the projection of our conditioning onto it, the other thing that external orientation does is it's the grabby hands. Mm-hmm. I need this thing or else. Yeah. I have to have it or
so
else.
That I can finally rest. Finally get the reward.
And then I'll be happy, and then I'll be safe, and then I'll know my manifestation skills work, and then I'll know God loves me. And then, So that's one telltale to understand if we're caught in a pattern of some sort, of any sort, or we could even say if some fear or confusion is riding shotgun here, is if it feels like, oh my God, I need this,
yes. ...
right? The sticky, grabby hand sensation. And that doesn't mean that the choice that grabby hand is leading you to is the wrong choice. What it means is you're going to have to slow down, get quiet, and look at what the attachment is and see if you can soften that attachment and work with that misunderstanding that you need anything to be whole and complete that is external to you, and then come back to your process of making that decision if you can.
Yeah, I think pace is important. You know, what you pointed to about slowing down is really critically important. And then the other thing that I have found tremendously helpful in this is that unbinds some of the grabbiness and a ton of the fear is permission to get it wrong. You know, I would say that the other thing that's really wedded to all this period for me of transition and some decisions to make is also in there really letting myself be a human being. It's so funny how often we like slip away from that, right? Like easy it is to think that like the goal and the outcome should be the one who gets it right. The one who has it together.
Sometimes the consequences suck, or so it feels, right? Sometimes they're massive. We get pregnant by someone that we then have to be in relationship with on some level the rest of our lives, or, all sorts of things can happen that we can say, shit, why did I do that? Because that's how the ego mechanism is seeing it. I'm a separate self and I made a decision and this is not evolving at all for my benefit, and I messed up. And life would have looked different if I chose different. So I understand on a bigger level why it can feel so scary to make mistakes, quote unquote. And yet there's no perfect way through the game of life.
No. And this is, we just recently re-aired our basic trust conversation. It all roads do lead to basic trust, that things may not go the way you had wanted or hoped. You may have, air quotes, really screwed something up, and that we're going to have to be called to a place ultimately where we see that is life painful? Yes. Do painful things happen? Certainly. But can we see it through a different lens where we don't spend the rest of our life beating ourselves up for the wrong thing that we did? Or we don't spend the rest of our lives angry with God for the wrong thing that came our way. So we do have to repair that in this conversation too. But I think that this permission to screw things up is at least a good step in the direction of some surrender into the flow of life, right? Because only the separate self says, I am going to stick the landing. I'm going to make this decision perfectly and flawlessly, and it will only have positive outcomes. And all will applaud how I'm the one all along that really saw the full picture and got it right. Certainly I have had those fantasies in this decision making that other people for whom this school choice affects, that they would just be like, wow, you really saw something there that I didn't see. Like, it's not going to happen, right? Like the outcome isn't that I'm appreciated for my wonderful decision. So, and also, I don't know. I think there's something so loving and so relieving about, I honestly don't know that I am going to make the perfect decision. I honestly don't know that this will not have downsides. I'm almost certain it will, because everything has upsides and downsides. It certainly will. There will be aspects of this that are a bummer. There will be aspects of the other choice that I could have made that will be a bummer, would have been a bummer. Like, that's the way it goes. And so the idea of I'm going to pristinely step on new ground, free from all conditioning and separate self. And so now I get to live in this space of like the one that got it 100% right. It's just a fantasy. And I do think that as we lighten our load, that we do have more and more life experiences that are way, kinder and more nourishing and more enjoyable. I have experienced that to be true, absolutely. But that we don't get out of our humanity ever. Like, we're all human beings. We have quirks, we have histories, we have personalities, and we can't, especially from the level of the separate self, the mind cannot decide something that's going to go 100% in our favor from now until the rest of eternity. Because I followed the rules about not having rules, right? I slowed down. I listened to my inner self. I used my internal. We can make ourselves nuts. And so sometimes just like, lightening it up a little bit. I don't know how this is going to go. I don't know. All I know in the case of me, but in the case of anyone that finally does act on something that's outside of the frame of what they had decided was acceptable. And like you were talking about with you and Mario, all I know is that something deep in me is saying yes to this. And that something higher up in the area of my forehead is saying, but have you consulted the rule book? And I'm going to trust that the deep in me sense is the way to go. And then I'm going to trust fall into life because that's it. That's the only part I get to play for now. Then it all unfolds and I don't know, we see.
Plus, we imagine that we would be good rule followers anyway, which by and large, as we talk about this, I keep thinking about that book, The Rules. Do you remember that
Oh my
book?
God, that's right. It was about dating, right? For women, how they had to be.
Such a bad
Let's just
concept
actually
of
write out
time.
the rules for female cultural conditioning in the Western world and give you the Halloween costume. You're welcome.
So many people were into that. In case you guys are not familiar with it, it was like the rules of dating. I never read the book, so I don't know it well, but it was things like don't text for 3 days after you date. Like don't ask them such and such questions. I mean, it was basically like
Don't
how
be
to play
smart.
hard to get. Yeah. So that
I didn't read the book either. I'm just being a jerk. For fun.
And I remember being like, this is silly because there's a million ways to relate. There's people who had sex on the first date and wind up married and very happy. There's people who didn't have sex for 6 months and have, a wonderful, flourishing, intimate relationship. There's people who got married after 8 weeks who stay married the rest of their lives, and people who got married after 2 years, like you should wait, and, got divorced the year later. Like, there's everything, there's every variety. So the idea that you could take any rule book and apply it to every circumstance is already just logically flawed. But then to imagine any of us are really good at following rigid parameters.
Right.
I mean, don't you notice then you impulsively go out of the rules? And so yeah, I won't have any starches until it's Saturday night and then I'm at a friend's house and okay, they want pizza. And then I have to eat like 6 slices because now I have to binge because I've been deprived.
Right, because now I decided that new rule, I'm out of prison tonight.
Yeah, or someone says, I'm going to follow the rules and not text a guy. And then they go have a drink or two and they're like, blowing up their phone nonstop, right? Yeah. So that's the other hilarious thing is that we're even necessarily good at rules. Some of them you all should follow. Sobriety, for example.
Yeah,
if that's
for me,
a path
still
for you.
super glad that every day the choice, I do not use drugs or alcohol, still feels like 100%.
Yeah,
but it's not just a rule.
That.
My deep being is also, if I listen to my deep being, it's like, yes, that's yes.
That's a yes.
That is a yes for you.
I think, in reality, whenever we make a decision, there's something we're prioritizing. So the survival mechanism in our brain and in our central nervous system will often prioritize safety. But then that's survivorship. That's not creatorship. If we want to be in a more alive, awake, evolving process, then we might prioritize something differently. If we are addicted to highs and intensity, we're obviously going to prioritize differently. And so beginning to get some relationship with yourself of like, what are you prioritizing here? And then reflecting, does this need to be prioritized right now? Is this for my highest and best good? Because anyone who's been through either capital T trauma or little t trauma, as we call it in the psychological, like developmental trauma in life, whose nervous system got dysregulated by it, or who adopted beliefs of unworthiness and unsafety, we let our nervous systems do the choosing a lot, right? So either we prioritize safety too often over and over again, or then we get sick of prioritizing safety, so we're going to go, screw it, and then just go completely impulsively and unsafe. So then that just reflects to us, okay, there's something that's not regulated here. But the answer is not just to keep choosing safety. Mm-hmm. The answer is to go in and see what's happening here that I'm afraid. And how can I bring more love and more compassion to it? Because I think what you were saying earlier, Brooke, about making mistakes and being human, and the truth is, we're not going to make all perfect decisions in all areas of life if the qualifier is there's never any suffering associated with it.
Right.
right? Like if
the
that's our
qualifier is it
qualifier,
goes the way you had it in your mind's eye when you made the choice, 100% guaranteed. It's not how life goes.
it's not how life goes. That's just not going to happen for us. So if we're going to be on this adventure, making bold choices that are outside of our comfort zone, I think one of the aspects of being that's super helpful for resilience is self-compassion and self-love, like self-kindness. If you can treat yourself with compassion when something doesn't go the way you imagined it would, then you can trust that it's okay to make a mistake. Mm-hmm. But if based on your prior conditioning, it's still very rocky terrain for you to have a view on yourself that is kind mm-hmm. and that is understanding, then it does become really scary to perceive that you might make a mistake, quote unquote.
Yeah, I'm going to quote a little Instagram feed moment. How do you like that?
Oh,
so high classy.
You are such a social media diva.
I was reading.
If you all followed Brooke,
you would know that. Yeah, once a month, I'm like, I underlined this in a book. Here's a leaf. I'm going to get better, I swear. But I lurk plenty. I enjoy other people's feeds. And Glennon Doyle Melton, some of you may know her. She's an author, and she posted something along the lines of, some friend said to her, like, you have screwed up so much in your life. She's also a sober person. How do you basically, like, how do you function? Like, how do you get up and just like go do other stuff? And Glennon Doyle's response was something along the lines of, like, at some point I had to get really good at radical self-forgiveness. And that just really landed in me. Like, yeah, at some point we have to find a way to really profoundly, not just like, oh, baby, yeah, we all make mistakes. You're okay. You're fine by me. But like marrow deep self-forgiveness of like, we're all here lifing, and we're doing it as human beings. And that seems to look this way, where we go through all kinds of different things. And how do we really, really bow to ourselves on that deep level of like, hey, I see you. And yeah, that hurt. And okay, carry on. Like, life's different now. Good on you for having awareness and for being who you are now. Like, the timeline keeps moving.
And I think if you have that orientation, you often don't feel that regret you're worried you'll feel. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't have a lot of regret in my life. And if you wanted to put my life in black and white, you could say I made mistakes. Someone could look at it through that lens, but it doesn't particularly feel that way. I just had a lot of experiences, and some of them hurt, mm-hmm. and some of them didn't go the way I imagined. But I don't have a lens of regret that I apply all too readily. And I think the more we build those muscles of self-forgiveness and self-compassion, the easier it is. You just don't tend to live in the past orientation as readily, mm-hmm. where you're ready to jump on yourself with the attitude of, how could you have done this? One more thing I wanted to say about external orientation is that can be part of the dilemma, because we have results in mind with a decision. Now, sometimes, what if your deep intuition says, date this guy who's kind of going to hurt and is not always going to be emotionally available, because you need to finally flush out and bring to the surface this wound of unlovability you've been carrying your whole life that I wish you no longer had to bear the weight of. Mm-hmm. So you make a decision from your intuition, and then you're in the circumstance, and it doesn't feel like you imagined. In your imagination, it's like your intuition said, yes, more. Your imagination said, oh, great.
Because it's going to work out.
I'm going to have a beautiful love affair. And then it feels painful. And so then we can say, oh, well, maybe I made that decision from the separate self. but how can we really discern all of that stuff? I mean, I tend to believe that there is a higher rhythm to things. There is a higher cosmic rhythm. I'm still integrating that belief. It's still a little conceptual for me rather than my owned experience, but I do tend to believe that way. So I think that's what complicates it. For example, this is a really silly little one, but this week I was reading about this woman I shared about earlier, Dr. Sue Morter. I'd seen her name a bunch of times for the last few months because she just published a book and she's been shared on other people's feed. No interest whatsoever. In fact, I'd look at her because people promoted her and then I'm like, meh, nothing. This week, I can't even remember what it was that struck my interest, but it struck it hard. And I'm like, I'm so intrigued by this woman. I bought her book right away. I downloaded it. I started reading and I thought I really want to study with her. I look online. And she's in Austin 4 days later. I'm like, heaven's opening up and it's giving me this divine synchronicity. Because this week I was setting an intention that if there was anything a teacher could offer me, I would love to have another one come my way. And then, I go to the event and I'm totally sick. It's like a half-hour drive. I can barely keep my eyes open and function. And, I'm sick through the event. So which lens was I going to look at it through? Oh, I shouldn't have done this. I pushed myself too hard because I had known that this weekend, after a lot of travel, I would probably be a little more run down than usual. Or it was a glorious, wonderful event in my life. Mm-hmm. If I have a filter that says all forms of discomfort and suffering equal bad, avoid, or mistake, I could easily perceive it through that lens.
Yeah.
But if you have a filter that is geared towards how wonderful, really the way I thought about it is, that's interesting. Maybe I'm going there sick and it's because something's going to shift in me. Mm-hmm. Or I don't know. Either way, I want to be here. But that filter that looks for, this is all for my evolution. Mm. But if you just looked at all good decisions have to look seamless and easy and perfect, you may not recognize that you've been making good decisions.
Yeah.
Quote unquote.
And on that note, I'd like to leave everyone with a little inquiry from our friend Matt Kahn that I use mentally sprinkled throughout my day in moments like this that I find is incredibly helpful. The inquiry goes a little something like this. What if you're not getting this wrong? What if you have never gotten this wrong? Sprinkle it through the day and see how the lens starts to change. Thank you so much for being a part of our community and for listening to today's show. The show notes, including any of the resources we mentioned, live at blissandgrit.com. Our member platform is at patreon.com/blissandgrit, where you can donate to the show and also get rewards for your support. That's a great place to go if you want to keep the episodes rolling and also connect with some other Bliss and Grit listeners. And you can, of course, always hang out with us on Instagram or Facebook or subscribe on the website where we send out our Friday digest. We're so grateful for all the reviews you've written, for the membership support you've provided, and for all of the notes that you send. Thank you all so much. We'll be back next week.